Hello, this is Press and Prejudice, light chats and deep dives into news ideologies. I'm your host, Sir Nick, and this is episode 1 of our first season. Today is a very important episode because this is the episode where we will start to build our context of what this show truly is about. You know, when you used to go to school, or maybe you still go to school, you know how important the first meeting for each of your courses, because that's the day the subject matter or the course is introduced to the students. Well, this episode is just like that. Today, we will be talking about what constitutes news, a brief history of it, especially in the Philippine setting, and the many ways it has been analyzed and criticized throughout history. So let's just get straight to the point. What constitutes news? What does it mean for news to mean news? I think the best way to start this conversation is to address first the misconceptions of people about the word news. I know any logical person will know that the word news does not stand for north, east, west, south, because news takes information from all directions, right? But believe it or not, a lot of people think that that's what the word essentially means. Kids, ladies and gentlemen, the word is not an acronym. In fact, that misinformation, or should I say, that meme that spreads around online, that is an example of a backronym. Quick discussion. A backronym or false acronym is for a lack of better term, a built acronym. This means that the letters that spell out a given word are given their own words that closely represent the meaning of the given word. That sounds confusing, right? But simply put, the word came out first and then the acronym was forced into existence. Much like how mnemonics work, like those acronyms, quote unquote acronyms that we used when we were studying. Acronyms, or true acronyms, on the other hand, start out as phrases and then their initial letters are taken out to come up with a new word. That is the acronym. So, what is news if it's not north, east, west, south? Well, etymologically speaking, news is just simply the word new, pluralized with an S inflection. In essence, this means that news is just a collection of new information or new knowledge or new events or new things. According to Mark Allen Peterson from Miami University, news is fundamentally defined as, quote, a discourse about selected contemporary events circulated among an audience, characterized by timeliness, relevance, and truth, though these meanings vary across cultural and temporal boundaries. End quote. Some angles to consider here. Number one, news is a discourse. In linguistics, we describe discourse as a unit or a linguistic unit that contains a body of connected speech or text, often going beyond what a sentence essentially is. In social linguistics, discourse can also be described as a way or mode of organizing thoughts, ideas, experiences, often encoded through a language. So, this means that news is both a body of text and a collection of experiences, knowledge, and ideologies. News is more than just an amalgamation of linguistic elements, a combination of words, sounds, phrases, sentences. It contains information. It represents people's experiences. It carries with it ideologies. That is why coming up with the right words and sentences matters so much in news delivery. We'll talk about that in the later episodes. Angle number two, news is a discourse about selected contemporary events. And this is where the essence of its etymology comes in. That news is all about what is contemporary, what is new. This is why there is like an unspoken competition between and among news companies as to who gets the latest scoop first. I'm not saying that they're at war with each other. What I'm saying is, it just feels like the first ones to spill the beans are often the first ones to be admired. Point number three, news is characterized by timeliness, relevance, and truth. We've already covered timeliness, and that leaves us with the relevance and truth. It could be said that the value or significance of a news story varies from person to person. This is because people have the tendency to care more about the things that matter to them, about the things that directly affect their lives. So, news becomes high impact when it talks about things or events that are relevant to the listeners or readers. I mean, let's just take this for example. Why would a farmer care about the latest on, let's say, the current stock market? I mean, yeah, the stock market does potentially affect the lives of farmers on a greater scale. But what would be more relevant news to a farmer would be something related to the weather or probably small scale market prices, gas hikes and rollbacks, things that immediately and directly affect or influence the life of a farmer. The stock market will simply bore the farmer to death. Maybe. I don't know. I'm neither a farmer nor a stocks investor, but you get the point. Truth is also an important factor in news reporting. We all know that. This is one of the aspects of news that can easily become highly controversial in today's society, and we will have a dedicated episode for that. But let me just put this out this early. I believe that all legitimate news companies aim to deliver only the truth and nothing but the truth to the public. It's a sworn oath among journalists. But in this day and age, where meanings are shaped by plurality and fluidity, truth can somehow become, should I say, manufactured? I know that sounds confusing. And I don't want to go on full philosophical about this, but bear with me for now. This concept of fluid truth, we will talk about this soon in the later episodes too. That aside, news is supposed to be ideally, essentially about reporting what is true. So far, we have established that news is a discourse, that it should be reporting about contemporary events, and that it is characterized by timeliness, relevance, and truth. The last angle about news that I want to talk about is that the very definition of news varies across spatial and temporal boundaries. What does this mean? Well, simply put, this means that whatever meaning we ascribe to the idea of news, there will always be some differences that need to be considered, especially in terms of country of origin, culture, society, time in history, etc., etc. How news is defined or characterized by Western countries may have some slight differences with how we define it here in Asia. There may even be differences between countries in Asia. Those meanings of news may also be different across history. The values and essence of news in the 1800s may be different from what our contemporary culture considers as news. So now that we have established what news essentially means, especially through a linguistic point of view, it's time to talk about some interesting things about its history, as well as the criticisms and analysis that it has received throughout human history. Uh, Take note first that this podcast is not intended to be a journalism 101 course. So we will not be lingering too much into the full history of how news came to be. I'm sure there are other podcasts who do that. Let's just say that we will just swiftly pass by a few moments in history in terms of news and news production. We don't want to start far too back in the prehistoric era, okay? But if you think about it, it seems like storytelling and reporting of events have been deeply ingrained in humans' way of living. These things, of course, have their cultural and artistic benefits, but more than anything, gathering around the fire and telling stories about how the hunter gatherers took down that woolly mammoth seemed like a natural way for people to interact with. Stories have always given us a vicarious experience, and telling the rest of the tribe about the changes in the terrain, or the abundance of food sources, or even the shifts in weather patterns, all became a survival strategy for early humans. In short, news, as essentially defined as a discursive practice of retelling events based on timeliness, relevance, and truth, has been existent ever since. But let's be more technical. Perhaps we should look at the history of news as a journalistic practice more than just storytelling.